The Assassin's Creed games are one of the few series that's embedded deep inside me. Ever since the original in 2007, I have been in love with this series. I mean really, just look at this fucking thing I made. When I was younger, I wanted nothing more than to be just like my boys Ezio and Altair. Sure, there have been missteps along the way, whether it be issues in the AC games of old or right up to now in recent times with games like Origins and Odyssey. But despite their issues, the Assassin's Creed series is easily my favorite annual, or I suppose now semi-annual series of video games. The eternal struggle between Assassins versus Templars, Order versus Chaos, leading us to the grandest question of them all. Be lied to, or lie to yourself? In this review, I'll be taking a look at all of the mainline Assassin's Creed games. All standalone games like Liberation, Freedom Cry, and the Chronicle games deserve a video of their own at a later date. So please join me as I take an extended trip down memory lane, revisiting and, in some cases, visiting for the first time, the 11 entries in the amazing Assassin's Creed franchise.
What have you done? When my people go to war, a hatchet is buried into a post to signify its start.
From not so humble beginnings, we have the original Assassin's Creed. By today's standards, this game is nothing special, but coming from 2007, this game is incredible. I mean, just look at it. No game had approached a Holy Land, or any land in fact, in this time period with such finesse and detail. In this entry, we take on the role of the bro Altair and his journey from disgraced student to the decisive leader of the Assassin's Brotherhood in Masyaf. The story told here is a simple one, but is nonetheless very memorable in the performances on all fronts, from the Templar leaders who meet the end of your blade to the Abstergo employees outside of the Animus. And speaking of outside the Animus, let me touch on Desmond's story real quick. Overall, I think Desmond's story was very poorly handled throughout the series, but at least here it's mostly unobtrusive and gives you a solid feeling of intrigue as to the actual goings-on in this little operation, and of course the legend of Subject 16. There's not a lot to say here about it, other than that I liked it simply because it kept me interested in the Out of Animus story to come the sequel. So from here on in, let's keep it in the Animus, shall we? The core gameplay of Assassin's Creed is actually a lot more intricate than one would think. allowing you to choose low, medium, and high profile actions. Slowly walking while spraying, or free running up buildings, gently pushing civilians aside, or forcing them out of your way as you run. And when things do go haywire, you've always got the staple Assassin's Creed combat to fall back on. The combat here is exactly what you'd expect from every Assassin's Creed up till Origins. So for the most part, you'll find the same positives and negatives that you would have found there. It's fun, but it's easy. Counter kills are epic visually, but are skillless. And of course, it just so happens that every guard is so well mannered that he lets all of his comrades get slaughtered by you while he waits his turn. On the whole though, open combat is a bit too easy, but it is fun, and is clearly not where the heart of Assassin's Creed lies. These mechanics, mixed with the simple yet interesting notoriety system in this game, offer a real freedom of choice when conducting missions. Speaking of missions, the structure here is quite interesting. You are told that there is a Templar in the city, go to this city and complete at least 3 tasks, such as eavesdropping, helping informants, or tailing persons of interest. And since there's up to 9 total tasks available to you in the designated city, you can really do the types of missions that you want to do in order to reach the assassination itself. It actually adds a good amount of replayability since these cities are actually quite large, and you often won't be exposed to more than a third of each city on a given mission. However, this is where a few problems begin to creep up. The cities themselves, while large in scope, are largely lifeless. There's civilians and guards alike walking around, but it really adds nothing to the experience since they're essentially window dressing. This is alleviated somewhat thanks to your interactions with said civilians and guards alike impacting your notoriety in real time. However, it is a little disappointing that there's really nothing to do if you feel inclined to dive into a city and free roam. This creates a mostly linear experience, despite the fact that you can go anywhere in the game's world anytime you wish, since there's really no point other than to do a little exploration. Not that that's a problem though, thanks to Assassin's Creed's revolutionary parkour system. By today's standards, this system is weak, an overall stiff and buggy affair, but in 2007, this was immaculate. The speed of Altair and his animations all feel very realistic, and to my knowledge, there wasn't another game that had done parkour of this realism and quality prior to Assassin's Creed's release in 2007. This simple yet fun system allows you to ascend up towers and get a view on the city previously unseen in most games. The game of course isn't up to snuff graphically, but there are still some beautiful vistas and fun climbing locations even by today's standards. That said though, I do think that once you've been to all the locations, the game begins to fall off rapidly. The informants and eavesdropping dialogue are nothing special and in fact more or less repeat themselves, just with your current target's name slipped in there. This makes the last few assassination missions and the tasks associated with them feel like a bit more of a chore than they have been, at least upon returning to a city you've already been to. Despite that though, the speeches given from both the Templars in-game and your mentor Al-Mualim are more than enough to keep you going. Rewatching some of these Templar memory corridors was eye-opening. Most of the Templars here have something of interest to say, and an honest-to-God decent case for a lot of their wrongdoings. This, compounding with Al-Mualim's eventual descent into madness towards the end of the game, meant that the seeds of doubt regarding the Brotherhood's actions were planted as soon as the series was born. It's such a shame that many a Templar later in the series pale in comparison to some of these short-lived yet fascinating characters.
Then we are finished. Beg forgiveness from your god.
He's long abandoned us. Long abandoned the men and women I took into my arms.
What do you mean?
Beggars, whores, addicts, lepers. Do they strike you as proper slaves? Unfit for even the most menial tasks? No. I took them not to sell, but to save. And yet you'd kill us all. For no other reason than it was asked of you.
No. You profit from the war. From lives lost and broken.
Yes, you would think that, ignorant as you are. Wall off your mind. They say it's what your kind do best. Do you see the irony in all this? No, not yet it seems. But you will.
All things considered though, while the original Assassin's Creed is certainly dated visually and especially mechanically, the game is certainly still worth a playthrough for any fan of gaming. Upon replaying it earlier this year, I was pleasantly surprised with just how much the original game had to say, both philosophically in regards to the game's world as well as our own. Assassin's Creed did a lot for the series. It established a wealth of mechanics and rules to play by, as well as cemented its role as a philosophy challenger and a debate starter. So how does one follow up a game that brought to life so many unexplored mechanics and core values? Why, with Ezio, of course. Let's not beat around the bush here. Assassin's Creed 2 is the tits. This game is everything Assassin's Creed did right, but turned up to 11. The cities are even more detailed and eye-catching now, capturing Renaissance Italy in a way few thought possible in ye olde 2009. Now teeming with life, whether it be groups for hire to assist you in stealth or combat, a doctor station, a blacksmith, it's just full to the brim with life. I really enjoyed the health and upgrade system as well. It is certainly linear, as there are simply better and worse armor and weapon sets, and it is a little lame that in order to get the look you want for Ezio, you sometimes have to downgrade to a lesser set of armor to get the look just right. However, functionally, I love this system, and I really wish they kept the system moving forward, maybe this and a mix of Unity's system. Your armor breaks with extensive damage, whether it be by falling or by blade, and you have to upkeep it at a blacksmith, as well as upkeep your health. So despite the system being very unambiguous, it was decent overall. Another thing Assassin's Creed 2 is filled to the brim with is sheer charm. Ezio, played masterfully by Devin Bostick, is a wonderful character with a fun and believable story arc. All of these years later, and to many, Ezio has yet to be topped as the favorite assassin among many solid candidates throughout the series. Most if not all the side characters are rock solid too, whether it be his family members like Uncle Mario and Sister Claudia, or characters met along the way like Leonardo da Vinci and Caterina Sforza. The story itself isn't exactly amazing, in fact at times it can feel like things are just sort of happening around Ezio and he's more or less just caught in the middle of it. Regardless of this though, just about every mission is a total blast, if not a little on the easy side. And if Ezio's personality and story doesn't do it for you, just look at the fucker. This is video game art design at its peak, wonderfully teaming the style of the Italian Renaissance with the instantly recognizable assassin robes in such a natural way. And of course, what would this be without one of, if not the most well-renowned soundtracks in all of gaming? Just incredibly layered and memorable tracks like Earth, Home in Florence, and of course, Ezio's Family. Naturally, there were some flaws though. Let me just get it out there, fuck the Abstergo storyline. I mean, what a worthless and obtrusive thing to put in a game. I know plenty of people got attached to Desmond and somehow, through some mystical fashion I'm sure, managed to like Rebecca, Sean, Lucy, and William Miles. But this is just one of those things I can't see at all. I mean sure, give us an intro and outro to this storyline in the game to keep it going, and maybe some voiceovers after important missions to keep it going, but don't tear us out of the game we're actually enjoying to play a worse version of it. It's certainly not at its worst in AC2, and in all honesty, it's not that intrusive. It's just a trope that got mostly established in this game and plagues all the games right up to the current games in the series. So that's my mini rant about that aspect of the game. But what about flaws when playing as Ezio? Well, they certainly didn't feel the need to tighten up the parkour, that's for sure. Ezio will just grab onto shit you absolutely did not want him to grab onto, and of course, get stuck all the time. While common in this series, it's most common here in AC2. Another small gripe is that on the PC release of this game, it was shipped with a lack of bump mapping. I won't pretend like I know what that is, but essentially it means that things like faces or walls don't have the little details and crevices that they should. So in a lot of areas, the game actually looks worse than the original Assassin's Creed, at least on the PC platform. But this does translate to the consoles as well. The game certainly wasn't a looker, even by 2009 standards, and the faces especially were quite poor. At the end of the day, it's not a huge deal, but looking at AC1 and AC2 back to back like this made me think, wow. AC2 really came out 2 years later. Another issue I have is another one I had with the original Assassin's Creed. It's simply too easy. There are a lot more gadgets and tools here at your disposal, like the gun and poison tip needles. You would think that this would make the game more difficult, but on the contrary, the game feels the need to spell out to the player exactly what your tool is capable of and how to use it in the exact scenario you're in. The game still requires a small level of problem solving, but is truly lacking in any real challenge. Regardless of these little issues, Assassin's Creed 2 made the world stand up and take notice of Assassin's Creed, that it was now a major player. A series which contains sublime gameplay unavailable elsewhere, as well as a complex and well thought out storyline, in a universe that few series had come close to in terms of sheer profundity. But where to go from here? Well, with the power of hindsight, we already know the answer. 2010 brought us into a new decade with our third installment in the Assassin's Creed franchise, Assassin's Creed Brotherhood. Brotherhood is an awful lot like Assassin's Creed 2, but in a positive way. In almost every aspect, Ubisoft took every little piece of Assassin's Creed 2 and made it a little, and in some cases a lot better than its predecessor. For instance, the open world. It's all good and well having multiple cities to explore, but sometimes it's just best to focus in on one large area rather than having multiple medium-sized areas. This new city, teamed with the territory system, feels even more alive and interactive than it was previously. Slowly but surely taking more and more of Rome for yourself is a great feeling, and fully capturing the city will take you far past the story. Speaking of the devil, let's discuss the story. Here Ezio is on yet another tale of revenge, but this time taking a few less twists and turns. The Borgia destroy your villa from AC2, and now you must take revenge on the Borgia by eliminating their influence in Rome and ultimately killing Caesar Borgia. Did I mess that up? I feel like I messed that up. If I had one thing to note as a downside to Brotherhood, it's that the story is nothing more than that. Sure, we get to see the rebirth of the Brotherhood in Rome, and of course eventually all of Italy, but these are mostly just cutscenes in between the frankly dull revenge plot that you spend most of your missions accomplishing. And I'll get my final gripe out of the way. Almost instantly, I found that money was a non-factor. All you need is income from a few shops around Rome, and I almost never needed money for new upgrades or supplies. But enough about negatives, let's get back to positives. The game finally had the sense to fine-tune the parkour system. Of course it's still not perfect, but I found Ezio stopped assaulting every ladder within a 6-foot radius, as well as going in the opposite direction of input. Additionally, having your A squad of assassins on call anytime you want is insanely fun, even if the combat is still so easy that you almost never need them. The side missions are also quite a bit more fleshed out this time, allowing for a bit more of a complete feeling experience, rather than the feeling of a story and only some side stuff to do. And that's it really. Assassin's Creed Brotherhood is a very simple Assassin's Creed game. It still continues Ezio and the Brotherhood story, it gives you an okay revenge plot to drive you forward to completing more assassination missions, and giving context to your control of Rome. And maybe that's why so many consider Brotherhood their favorite. It's just a super solid Assassin's Creed entry with no major downsides per se. But for me, that's my personal issue with it. The game has a very little personal flair to it. Most if not all of its charms are the themes, designs, or characters carried right over from AC2. Critics got a lot of flack from calling AC Brotherhood essentially AC 2.5, but in all honesty, I agree. Despite the scope of it, Brotherhood could have easily been an expansion of some sort, or a standalone even. I guess for me it just didn't do quite enough different from AC2 or special on its own for me to fully respect it as a mainline AC game. 2011 gave us the final entry in Ezio's long-running story, Assassin's Creed Revelations. Now this is more like it. Revelations sees us playing as an aging and immaculately redesigned Ezio as he assists the Assassin's Brotherhood in Istanbul, while he slowly uncovers the truth of our friend Altair and the ultimate fate of the Piece of Eden. I'll just come right out and say it, I fucking love this game. The Middle Eastern vibe you get from this game's world is irreplaceable, teamed with the Brotherhood storyline here with the new character Yusuf. Don't get me wrong, I absolutely love the Italian Renaissance and how 2 and Brotherhood brought that time period into their respective games, but having Ezio outside of an Italian setting was a good call. Ezio at his older age learning all about this completely different culture from his own, as well as teaching his culture to characters along the way, is just wonderful. The game also alleviated the issue with economy I had in Brotherhood. The game still maintains the same idea of territory and owning shops, however it doesn't flush you with cash like in Brotherhood. And while I'm singing its praises, the Altair plotline was simply fantastic. Fleshing out Altair was something I wanted ever since I played the original, and here I feel like they honestly knocked it out of the park. Having a second game for Altair would have been nice, but weaving his story in with Ezio's final story just felt right. The graphics as well only got better. While the faces are still pretty whack looking, the game overall looks great. And guess what? No out of animus sections. Well okay, there are out of animus sections, but get this, they're completely optional. Why they didn't do this going forward, I have no idea. But I digress, back to the positives. I found the hook blade mechanic as well to be really interesting. In essence, it only makes Ezio faster and cover more ground when climbing, but they still did a great job of making the hook blade give good feedback through sound and animations. Ziplines were decent too. Simply offering unique and interesting ways to traverse the map is always a good inclusion in my opinion, so long as the gimmick doesn't traverse too many games in the series. Not every new addition was great though. Den defense is legendarily weak, almost zero reason to play after the tutorial. It's a neat concept, just not executed very well and frankly has no place in Assassin's Creed. That being said, of course, in the story, you only have to do it once, so it's not a huge deal. However, it does beg the question, why add something like Den Defense but then completely ignore issues of repetitive gameplay loops that have plagued all previous entries in the series? The parkour is still wonky at times. The character at times chooses direction for you, combat is a matter of holding down one button and pressing another, eavesdropping and tailing missions are boring as sin, and it just kind of goes on. In the final mission, where you tail the wagon on the parachute, man, just talk about a ridiculous mission. I almost couldn't complete it because I was laughing so hard. It's just so stupid, I mean, just watch.
Sophia!
I don't think so.
Hold on!
Obviously.
I mean, I'll take it, man, since we easily get the best ending of the series right after. This shit is just fantastic. I absolutely love Altair and Ezio's ending.
If you are asked, say I sent the apple away. Tell them I sent it to Cyprus or Cipango or that I dropped it into the sea. Tell them anything to keep men away from this place. This apple must not be found. Not until the time is right.
I have lived my life as best I could, not knowing its purpose, but drawn forward like a moth to a distant moon. And here at last, I discover a strange truth. I am only a conduit for a message that eludes my understanding. Who are we who have been so blessed to share our stories like this? To speak across centuries?
Honestly, if the series were to end here, I would have no problem whatsoever. And then the Isu have to come in and ruin it. Yeah, I suppose I've avoided talking about them long enough. And since at this point in Revelations their story had come forth, I'll touch on them real quick. Just like the Abstergo storyline, I have no connection with it. I think it was completely unnecessary. And yeah, sure, you get to see the Assassin and Templar philosophical battle rage on through multiple eons, but it just feels like they threw so much at you, just like, please care, and I just don't. I feel like it's what happens when a series goes on for too long. They go on that they feel the need to explain the origins of the universe they are in, like in Naruto or in the recent Alien movies. Not everything needs to be explained, some things are best left unsaid, and that's how I feel with the Isu. That said, again, it's not like they take up a lot of time in the games, but it's just another one of the things that I feel the series could have done without, especially with my love for the boy Ezio. However, all good things must come to an end, and with Revelations, we must part ways with our friend Ezio. Before we begin with AC3, I just wanted to let loose a little personal bias. Without giving out too much personal info, I live very close to a lot of the areas that Assassin's Creed 3 takes place in. So naturally, I've experienced firsthand a great deal of colonial American artifacts, and visited many a museum and many a fort in my days. The Native American people were also quite prominent in my area as well. Not the Mohawk as portrayed in the game, but instead the Pequot, who have a reservation not 20 minutes from my house. So why am I telling you all this? Well, frankly, I think I just have an affection for the world of Assassin's Creed 3 and for Connor himself that I otherwise would not have had if not for my experience with both colonial America and the Native Americans. As I was playing through the game and reading and watching reviews, I was noticing that barely anyone was as stoked about being in a colonial New England, or that we get to play as a Native American in the game as I was. That said though, let's continue with what I like. Connor looks absolutely amazing. His tall, buff stature works wonderfully with Achilles' assassin outfit, and the light brown with blue accents just feels right. Connor also feels exceedingly fun to play as. His new animations are slick as hell. At times Ezio felt like he was stopping mid-animation, but no such issue here. Connor bolts across the battlefield and even up trees now, like he's slicked up with Bovril sliding across a granite floor. The game also features a few new stealth upgrades like crouching in magical grass, as well as being able to whistle from behind cover and in bushes coming in a later patch. And of course, what would a review of AC3 be without mentioning the sublime ship combat? It is of course not as complete as 4 or Rogue, but it's still an extremely visceral and fun experience to pilot a ship in AC3. I'm also glad that in this game we saw a return to the line blurring between Templar and Assassin. If I missed anything from the original Assassin's Creed whilst playing the Ezio trilogy, it was that the Templars made you think more often than not. The same sort of deal happens here.
They must lay down their arms. They must stop this war.
Why them and not the Redcoats?
Do you not think we asked the same question of the British? These things take time. And it would have succeeded had you let me play my part.
Part of the puppeteer.
But better we hold the strings than another.
No, the strings should be severed. All should be free.
And we should live forever on castles in the sky. You wield your blade like a man, but your mouth like a child. And more will die now because of that.
And I'm glad we got to see this play a role in Desmond's final decision at the end of the game, which, yes, we will get to. But first, let's keep it going on in the Animus. I really like the new engine they used for 3, 4, and Rogue. The visuals are solid, and the games don't act like 60 FPS is a sin like the Ezio trilogy did. This game, as well as 4 and Rogue though, do still suffer from looking like someone has smeared a half-assed filter over the game in an attempt to bring more life to the image, when in truth it just washes it out. The game, while having a satisfying payoff for Connor, takes way too long to get going. I was recently playing AC3 Remastered and even rushing through it. It took me well over 3 hours to get my assassin suit and really start playing the game. This was, of course, with prior knowledge of all the missions and how to best execute them, and skipping all the cutscenes I could. There was absolutely no reason to keep us playing Haytham as long as we did. I actually quite liked the setup on paper, but there was no reason to make Haytham's section for more than an hour and a half max. And it just feels like a big fuck you moment to the player when you finally beat the Haytham section, which is essentially just a long-winded setup for the bad guys, by the way, to only be slotted into the shoes of an 8-year-old Connor and have to start fresh all over again. I don't mind the length of Connor's intro to the story, I just dislike that it was a back-to-back fuckfest of walking around and listening to exposition. As I said, I do really like where the story of Connor ended up, with Haytham still not agreeing with Connor's worldview, but acknowledging him as a strong person, and Charles Lee doing everything in his power to stop Connor, but took defeat like a man. The first 5 sequences just left an awful taste in my mouth throughout the rest of the story. Still though, when the game does get going, it really does get going. And man, this is a sad fucking story. I mean really, Connor just gets played by absolutely everyone. By Juno, by the Templars, by the Tea Party, and even to an extent Achilles, since he essentially told Connor to do whatever it takes to defeat the Templars. They all took Connor's mix of naivete and immense skill to suit their own purposes, leading Connor to step on his own toes and have to kill his best friend. All to find out that he had been working for the man who had actually ordered his village destroyed. All the while, with every Templar killed, small nuggets of information slowly chip away at the fantasy that Achilles and the Tea Party tricked Connor into believing he was working towards. It is a complex story, and one I would hold in high regard, if not for its seemingly eternal introduction, as well as Ubisoft cutting some of Connor's dialogue from the final game. I'm sure every Assassin's Creed fan is aware that content was cut in order to get AC3 out in times of the holidays. But what dumbass thought it was a good idea to cut dialogue clips such as this from a character who's supposed to replace Ezio?
Mother, Father, I am sorry. I have failed you both. I made a promise to protect our people. I thought if I could stop the Templars, if I could keep the revolution free from their influence, that those I supported would do what was right. They did, I suppose, do what was right. What was right for them.
How in God's name they thought that cutting dialogue like that and other character building quotes was a good compromise is beyond me. Audio such as the clip you just heard are in the game files. Couldn't they have pushed the game back a few months, maybe a few more, just to implement these clearly important pieces of information? I find it ironic, but also quite fitting that a game about a Native American man and his tribe getting fucked over managed to fuck over the Native American man in terms of his character development in the process. At the very least, there are the Davenport side missions to undertake, and that allows us to take a closer look at Connor. But in all honesty, they should have just weaved these into the story in some way. However, upon a replay, with the rapid-fire way the third act plays out, I think they knew they had taken it too far, with how long it takes to get the story going, and just wanted to get on with it. But then, you're just left with the worst roller coaster of them all. One with short-lived peaks and noticeably long-winded valleys. It's time. What the fuck was Desmond's ending? I understand the meaning behind it. Essentially, Juno and Minerva laid out the Templar and Assassin philosophies before Desmond, just using different words. And in the end, Desmond ends up siding with the Templars' way of thinking and killing himself, thus releasing Juno and saving the current world, technically. Just like Haytham and Connor's story, it's good on paper. The execution is just whack. Juno and Minerva talk in circles for like 10 minutes, all leading up to Desmond touching a ball, I guess, and that saves the world? I mean, it's just so abrupt and with almost no build-up throughout the game. There's the little messages Juno leaves in the cave, but that's about it. Connor's ending where he leaves the amulet in Achilles' son's grave is fulfilling, while Desmond's ending just left me feeling completely empty, and frankly, I wish I never went through the stupid puzzles and mazes in the cave to begin with. At least if I knew the ending was this bad, I would have just stayed in the Animus with Connor. And I think that's the main issue with AC3. It just has this nasty habit of leaving an awful taste in your mouth to the point that it becomes more difficult to enjoy the good that the game has to offer. Still though, I think Connor gets way too much flack from the community, as does AC3 as a whole. But of course, it was punted far into obscurity with the Jesus of Assassin's Creed games. First and foremost guys, how the hell did we end up here? Don't get me wrong, I'm more than pleased with the result. But whose call was it to take a story about a pirate turned assassin and actually run with it? I mean, there were so many things that could have gone wrong here. But as I'm sure all of you already know, almost none of them did. Assassin's Creed Black Flag is just one of those games that's hard to dislike, unless you have some extreme disdain for the Assassin's Creed formula or somehow dislike the visceral and engrossing ship combat. Any fan of games is bound to find enjoyment from this title. This game, of course, sees you as the pirate Edward Kenway from Wales. A man with a decent head on his shoulders. It's just a shame it's always filled to the brim with alcohol. Edward, like Connor, is another one of those characters where people seem to mostly be indifferent to them, while I felt a strong attachment to the character within the first few hours of playing them. Speaking of the first few hours, thank God Ubisoft learned their lesson here. No more 5-hour hand-holding sessions. The game has a quick opening and lets you get straight into the action. Well, when I say straight into it, fuck it, I'll talk about it now. Wow. I didn't think the Out of Animus plots could get worse, but they sure did. Black Flag sees you as a faceless Abstergo employee mining data about Edward Kenway for them. If only it ended there. You eventually wind up getting manipulated by an IT technician named John. Fuck this guy. Easily my least favorite character in the series, hands down. I mean, what a piece of shit character. As if having to hear his unevenly acted and inflected lines of dialogue wasn't enough, he forces you to do unfun, tedious, soulless, unskippable puzzles. Also, he can give you the goofiest moment in the series. Here, just watch.
I believe we've been formally introduced. Not in this era, anyway. I wish I could explain all this strangeness, but there isn't much time. The short of it is, you saw my beloved Juno.
Fuck this shit storyline. Everything else is great though. Seriously, I love this game. The game prides itself on being the most open title in the series up to this point. Almost immediately, the entire map is opened up to you. Almost nothing is locked off to you if you haven't completed the story yet. While we're at it, let's circle back to the story. I actually had a lot of fun with it. It's absolutely not the most complex story in the series, and the profundity that I loved in the prior titles isn't something you'll find here. But man, just about every character here is super likable. I'm not big on the history of pirates, and they're really not a go-to for me subject-wise, but I had a great time reading all about the characters in this game and their misadventures in real life. They did a great job bringing them all into this game. And that's the big thing for me with this story. There's really nothing wrong with it. It's not the best story in the series, but it's not like it's a lukewarm either. It's tragic, but still has an optimistic ending. The only part I really didn't enjoy was the final assassination, where you have to parkour your way around the temple. It was pretty tedious, and frankly kind of dumb to blue ball us like that. But it's such a small portion of the game that I don't really mind. But the game also felt the need to continue including the tedious tailing missions and eavesdropping missions. Sure, they're a series staple, but with how open-ended the game is, these missions felt largely out of place, even if they were a very small percentage of missions. All in all, this game's absolutely awesome. Fuck John Gang for life. Here's another one that I just fucking love. Black Flag's superb ship battles and traversal make a comeback here, with a slightly smaller but still large game world. And despite the smaller size, Rogue benefits from a greater variation in the game world, letting you traverse a large portion of the world rather than a small set of samey looking islands. Rogue tells the tale of Shay Cormac, an assassin turned Templar. At least he does once Achilles, who looks ridiculous in his outfit by the way, knowingly puts Shay on a suicide/2012 type mission, where his actions may or may not have leveled an entire city. They did, by the way. Shay's story is rock solid, and although it did start to feel like a checklist, killing off Hope, Liam, and the others after a while, as well as being a little on the short side, Shay's story sticks out as one of the best in this series. I'm also very pleased we got to see Achilles, Adewale, and Haytham get some love in the game. Adewale did kind of only exist to get killed by Shay, but of course it's great to see him again. It was nice he confirmed that he still had great respect for Edward. Haytham as well didn't get too much time to shine. His presence more just confirmed what we already knew about him, other than the fact that he's the one who massacred Big Man Achilles' leg. We at least got to see how Achilles got to be the reserved and thoughtful man he was in AC3, even if it revealed many of his personal flaws in the process. I wasn't the biggest fan of Stalkers though, they really just felt tacked on and not particularly interesting, just a bit of a nuisance. However, Shay himself also gains access to some new toys, like the rifle and gas mask. The sleep and berserk darts are both ingenious inclusions, of course basing them off the poisons in AC2. Updating them to a ranged weapon was a good call, and I'm glad they didn't add more gimmicky tools like they did in Revelations. Another thing Rogue did well was just give you this insane fluidity throughout the story. The game gets going, and if you have time and caffeine on you, it was fully possible to just plow right through it. Rogue took the formula of earlier Assassin's Creed titles, Black Flag in particular, and just streamlined the whole experience into a very easily consumable but still wildly entertaining package. This is all, of course, wrapped up with a lovely bow called the story. With Rogue, I found myself taking the least amount of breaks while playing through. Virtually no metaphorical roadblocks in the form of either straight up level capping or in the form of a bad mission that you just didn't want to complete at the time. In that sense, it's a lot like what Brotherhood was to AC2, except here we get an exceptional Assassin's Creed story on top of being a rock solid experience. It's strange for some of the biggest games in this series, Black Flag and Rogue, give me the same amount if not less to talk about than prior titles in the series. I think it's because with the wealth of things to go over, in order to boil down the games to a palatable size, given that we're to address every game here, there's only time to give two sizable cliff notes about each. Nothing is boring, and everything is interesting. Neither title sees nearly the weaknesses that the other games in the series show, while still boasting mighty great heights of their own. Absolutely awesome games, can't recommend them enough. Now let's have our enjoyment come to a careening halt and talk about Unity. Unity is a complicated game to talk about. Not only is this game one of the greatest give and takes, but also one of supreme thoughtfulness and yet thoughtlessness all wrapped into one package. Upon Unity's release, it was easily one of the worst Assassin's Creed experiences anyone had had at that time. The game didn't run. More, it felt like a game trying to run, but constantly hitting slabs of concrete supplied by Arno doing just about anything apart from standing still. And even then it was too much for any system to handle. But I've been touching on all these games, all patched up, and Unity's abhorrent release will be a non-factor going forward. Unity is of course set in the French Revolution, taking control of Arnaud Dorian, the British French guy who is also British, for some reason. Arno's story is a tragic one. He goes from being a young man full of charm and wit, to a man who has lost absolutely everything and has nothing but the creed to carry him forward. And that's all well and good looking at it on paper. But when you really dive into the story, it's a complete bastard of a thing. Arno being framed and sent to prison only to meet an assassin is a neat setup, but it only goes further and further downhill. So apparently in France, not only does everyone speak English 100% of the time with a posh British accent, they also have a completely hypocritical council of assassins that Bellic, your mentor, and Arno himself must report to. If powdered wig assassins weren't stupid enough, fear not. Instead of talking to Templars after a successful assassination and getting their worldview and dying wishes, you now get a shitty piece-by-piece cutscene. Oh no, it's not just a cutscene to fill in what the Templar was divulging to you. It just so happens that every assassin ever has had a special Isu power that lets you see a person's memories that you've just killed. What? That makes absolutely no sense. Wasn't mentioned before and wasn't mentioned after. I mean, at least the ending was solid. Being able to talk to Germain was nice, and Arno's final speech was a good one. But I just have to touch on Elise's death. I've never seen such a textbook example of bad writing. They needed Elise to die. So what they did is make the smart character between Arno and Elise make the dumbest move in history. Yeah, I know, it's playing off of when Arno didn't kill Germain when he had the chance. And now Elise won't let it happen again. But bitch, the man has a lightning sword. A fucking lightning sword. And now, all of a sudden, you're telling me that this intelligent character pushed all rational thoughts aside and said, yes, there's no way I can get this piece of rubble off of Arno in time. Which, by the way, he does 5 seconds later by himself. And just runs straight at this man who has a fucking lightning sword. Also, Elise could die and we get the big emotional scene where Arno has a revelation about his life and so on. And the twist for Bellic is the rat in the Assassin Brotherhood. Really? Like, why is this even here? It wasn't enough for Bellic just to take a back seat once the story got going. They just needed to have him become a villain for no good reason. I know they wanted Arno's story to be a tragic one. I mean, I think they just forced their hand way too hard. Alright, that's enough about the story. I just hated a lot of it and had a good amount to say. Story aside, the game is still solid. I really love the new customization system, allowing you to acquire a myriad of different clothing pieces and weapons, all to help suit your personal playstyle. It's honestly a wonderful system and I love its inclusion. I do have to say though that the leveling system in the game is just bad. Having a level system in my opinion just murders this type of combat. Maybe if they had a level system with more levels and a more intricate combat system, nudge nudge wink wink, I think it would have felt better. But as it is, it feels way too long to ascend just one level. Speaking of combat though, I do have to say I like how they slowed it down a little and made timing a little more important. It was a welcome change to a series that really needed it. Another welcome change was the crouch button. Yes, it only took 7 years, but here it is. The crouch button in Assassin's Creed games. Just sucks the cover system is stiff as hell and barely works. But hey, at least we can crouch now. And on a subject such as stealth, let's discuss the assassinations themselves. Unity took a different approach in which you're no longer allowed to use any old weapon to perform your assassination. And the game graciously allows you, or rather forces you, to initiate certain events within whatever party or event is happening in order to score your assassination. In theory, I like the difficulty that such a thing might allow. But to me, I found that it really streamlined assassinations into really only 1 or 2 good ways to pull them off. There's really no freedom to perform the game's namesake. You gotta do it exactly how the game wants you to do it. Naturally there's some variation, but after the first few assassinations, you'll catch on mighty quick that Ubisoft really wants you to do it their way, not yours. The locations in which you perform said assassinations though are absolutely sublime. Unity is visually still one of the best looking games ever made, and its interpretation of France is easily one of the best open worlds ever made. The Notre Dame is simply jaw-dropping, as well as all the other landmarks brought into the game. It is an absolute joy to scale up these amazing landmarks, and Arno's parkour is easily my favorite in the series. The system does a great job providing the player with superb audio and visual feedback, with the animations in particular being fantastic. Still though, it has to be said that this game still suffers with a low frame rate across all systems. Nothing like when it first came out, but this wonderful world and your parkour journey through it is noticeably hampered by stuttering and FPS drops. It's such a shame that this game on paper offers such fantastic ideas, but then headbutts you with truly unignorable downsides. Unity as a game is much like its story. It is trying to do so much, maybe more than it can handle, and often has to undercut potentially soaring heights by stepping on its own toes with silly implementations or ideas. Unity is a wonderful experience when it's working as intended, but you just get constant reminders that this game is endlessly trying to bite off more than it can chew. Assassin's Creed Syndicate sees you as two assassins this time, Jacob and Evie Fry, set in the Industrial Revolution in Britain. Once again, Ubisoft seemed to learn their lesson from their prior entry, while somehow still managing to miss the mark. For one, Syndicate is able to keep its frame rate both high and steady, while still maintaining Unity's sublime presentation. Syndicate also suffers far fewer bugs and still has superb parkour and gladly maintains the crouch button. Gotta have that. But what does Syndicate add? Well, a lot. The game sees a return to having a whole band of guys and gals under your wing through the gang system, something first established in Brotherhood, but brought forward in a much deeper fashion here. Your gang is multifaceted, allowing you to use what are essentially different units and upgrading them with their own individual skills as well as leveling up their base stats. But here we start to see Syndicate's main problem bubbling to the surface. Why are we using a random gang and not a brotherhood of assassins? The whole game suffers from feeling like the assassins and Templars were just tacked on lazily later in production. Hell, you don't even adorn your hood as Jacob or Evie unless you're crouching. Thank God for the crouch button. Quite literally every story beat here just screams to me that this game was in no way an Assassin's Creed title when it was in its conceptual form. Then someone said, hey, let's just add it to the Assassin's Creed series. And speaking of story beats, let's dig right into it. I find that Syndicate's story is quite possibly the least offensive thing I've ever played through. The good guys are good, the bad guys are bad. The story just has this sort of feel to it where you feel like you're watching a Disney film aimed at children. The story can be boiled down to brother and sister don't get along. Brother and sister have to beat evil dude. Brother and sister work together for a bit, then have a falling out. Brother and sister beat evil dude. Brother and sister are now best friends. There's even the cliche as fuck scene prior to the final mission where they both agree to go their separate ways after the bad guys beat. And speaking of beating the bad guy, oh sweet god, who in their right mind thought that a 3D version of the final boss from Ninja Gaiden was a good idea? This shit's absolutely terrible. And when Evie screamed, together, when they're about to kill Patrick Star or whatever the fuck the guy's name was just awful. It's not like it's all bad. In fact, in some aspects, I like it more than Unity's story simply because they bit off what they could chew this time. Was it a little less than they can chew? Absolutely. But the story is well paced at least and keeps the game going, so it was the bare minimum of a job story in a game, and the ending was certainly the weakest point of the game, but for me it was a neat little adventure. The game also features plenty of little doohickeys and nifty gadgets, the most notorious being the zipline, allowing you to completely bypass climbing buildings and instead just zip up them. In all honesty, I don't hate the zipline. I know I get a lot of flack for this regardless of how I word my reasoning, but for me it just boils down to this being the only game it's in. I would certainly mind if this was in every title following it, but here, since it's only in this game, I don't really mind it. The visuals associated with using it as well as the audio are just incredible, and ziplining from towering building to towering building is a sight to behold. Although I was really disappointed to see that Unity's complete joke of a leveling system made a return. 10 levels, really? Unfortunately though, they still manage another downgrade, in this case the combat. Combat is both sped back up and dumbed down even more. It's really unfortunate. Plus, guns at this point in history were way too strong for this type of combat. All in all though, I actually really enjoy Syndicate quite a bit for what it is. That will upset many people since Syndicate was seen as the death of the series for many upon its release. And if this were at the time of its release, I may have agreed with you. But with hindsight being 2020 and all, I feel like I can adequately put Syndicate in a position that I think suits it well. Syndicate is a fun aside that, while not deserving its own title as a mainline game thanks to its clear lack of assassins and Templars, it earns its place in gaming as a whole solely on its merits of its tight gameplay, light atmosphere, wonderful world, and a badass soundtrack. I don't really consider Syndicate an Assassin's Creed game per se, and that task being easy for me may be why I like it so much more than other fans, much like another bronze-clad entry in the series. But before we adorn our skirts and goofy-looking helmets though, let's first look at another divisive entry in the series. Assassin's Creed Origins sees us take the role of Bayek of Siwa. Let's just get this right out of the way. Origins looks absolutely incredible, not just in terms of its visual fidelity, but also the absurd attention to detail in this massive, beautiful open world. And what would such a vast open world be without an eye in the sky? Senu, Bayek's trusty feathered friend, is the sort of third eye that you can access under most circumstances, giving you a massive view of the surrounding area. Naturally, this is meant for targeting enemies and objectives alike, but sometimes I just opened up Senu's view just to take a look out into the far distance at this amazing world. However, another massive change to this AC title is its combat, which I am certainly not a fan of. The whole system feels like you're a piece on a chessboard. Nearly every confrontation is the same. Dodge, hit, block, dodge. And it just sort of goes on and on till the enemy flops over dead. The other combat system that earlier Assassin's Creeds adopted was certainly not without its faults, and it got boring as well. But here, the combat just feels like a complete button mash fest. The earlier combat system at least had superb and visceral finishing animations, as well as parry and block animations that kept things brutal while being visually rewarding. The early combat system absolutely had a bad habit of making it look like you were doing more than you were, but at the very least it felt satisfying despite its ease of execution. In Origins though, we do at least get a very nice leveling system. You know, like a real one, instead of what we got in Unity and Syndicate. The progression is very long, but it is fair, and the weapons and shields you get along the way are teeming with flair and intrigue. I just wish that we could get the same leveling and item system that we got in Origins in an Assassin's Creed that offered similar movement and combat in the prior titles. Many argue that it was long past time to move on to a different movement or combat system. However, I feel like Origins just way overstepped itself, and in the process made a game that felt nothing like an Assassin's Creed title, at least in the gameplay sense. But what about the story? Now this is a tricky one. Origins is a very long story, so condensing it like this feels wrong, but for the sake of brevity, I will. First 2 acts? Great. Final act? Weak as hell. I mean, I've read, watched, and played through plenty of stories that fell off towards the end, but nothing went from being as good as the first 10 hours of Origins versus the final few hours. Tying Bayek's personal struggles into Aya's grandiose affairs was a bad call in my view, and making us play the final mission as Aya, I don't mind Aya, but man, it really seemed like the devs wanted us to hold her in the same regard as a multi-layered and complex character as Bayek, which I just couldn't. The hinting towards the Assassin's Creed itself was also quite poor, like how the assassin symbol was supposedly founded. Some dude drops a bird skull on the beach and that's the ticket. I also hated how the OG Brotherhood was made up of Bayek, Aya, and then a series of side characters that you barely know. I feel like there is a feeling of incompleteness to the way the hidden ones were handled, much like just about every side quest here. Similar doesn't even come close to describing just how incessant these quests can be. The person you're talking to or someone related to them is dead or dying, and you need to save/avenge the affected party. There are some decent side storylines, but many fall into one of the 2 tropes I just mentioned. Either that, or it's dealing with some kid that reminds Bayek of Hamo in some way. I get that Bayek is a Medjay, and they're basically freelancing nice guys, but man, if the subject matter of the quest is different, the tone is completely unchanged throughout the entirety of the game. Origin's story is a serious and tragic tale, but man, just something, anything to lighten up the mood a bit would have been greatly appreciated. On the whole though, Origins is a great open world experience, and while I do find it lacking in some regards as a game, I find it greatly lacking in most regards as an Assassin's Creed title. And frankly, no segue will top that statement when beginning a discussion into Assassin's Creed Odyssey. Now this here is the big one. Loved by outsiders to a series, hated by the series faithful. How does one such as myself not only come to a firm conclusion about Odyssey, but also be able to condense that opinion into a palatable fashion? This game has easily been the hardest one to write about, but here goes. Assassin's Creed Odyssey is not an Assassin's Creed game. If I were to consider it as such, I would tout the game a complete and utter failure. Not only bending to the point of breaking the lore of not just the Animus through its RPG elements, but also with the horrible and nonsensical handling of the Pieces of Eden. Parkour as well takes an even greater hit. Well, the system itself does at least, certainly not the character when you jump off a 300-foot tall statue. Assassinations aren't even really assassinations. What I'm trying to say is this. Odyssey is not an Assassin's Creed game, however, that does not make it bad. In fact, I really enjoyed Odyssey. There's a popular video by Lasers called Assassin's Creed Odyssey Broke Me. Melodramatic title aside, I actually sympathize with almost all of his gripes about the game. However, I believe our interpretation of games as a whole are different on a fundamental level. For me at least, casting the Assassin's Creed name out of my mind did wonders for my enjoyment of Odyssey. For most though, this is out of the question, or straight up unattainable to them, and the series as a whole has been irreversibly tainted by Odyssey and the abhorrent way it treats the Assassin's Creed lore. I have a great deal of respect by those saddened and hurt by the way Odyssey just seems to spit in the face of all prior titles in the series just so it could do its own thing. And of course its own thing wasn't nearly good enough for most fans to accept that this was their mainline entry in the series after Origins set a high bar of giving the series a fresh set of new mechanics and massive scope to boot. So there's a rant. Hopefully you understand why I like Odyssey despite its mistreatment of the lore, and let's get into the game itself. Assassin's Creed Odyssey is set in ancient Greece, allowing you to play as either hot hunk Alexios or the fiery female Cassandra. This choice of course leading the other character as the story's antagonist. Well, technically, Odyssey has 3 storylines: the family story, the Atlantis story, and the cult story. I actually quite enjoyed just how massive each of these stories are, and the way they interconnect with one another. As for the stories themselves, I thought they were solid. Like Syndicate, it's a very light affair with nothing really unexpected happening, but still being entertained enough by it to continue on. The cult story was barely a story if I'm honest, but the cult system itself was properly interesting. While not every cult member's rabbit hole was a fun one to go down, the experience was still fulfilling. These 3 stories intertwined with the massive scope of this absolutely beautiful open world makes it really feel like an Odyssey. With all prior entries in the series, you could really just blow straight through the story, even in Origins. Here though, you need to do side quests in order to be the required level to participate in story events. This is a hot topic, so be prepared to disagree with me. I actually like this in the long run. It's definitely a multifaceted and possibly dubious design by Ubisoft, but I really do feel like it paid off. Maybe I'm just easy to entertain, but traveling all around this open world, whether by land or by sea, was a joy for me, and I almost never felt like I was grinding for levels for too long. This is in part because I really enjoy exploring and opening the map up to myself as early as I can in games like this, but mostly because I really enjoyed the side quests in this one. As with most things in Odyssey, this too is a hot topic, so buckle up. I really adored the more lighthearted and fun atmosphere on offer here. It was such a refresher after the constant, "Oh, my husband or wife is dying, can you go save him for me?" quests we saw in Origins. No doubt Odyssey has its share of filler or simply uninteresting side quests, but some of the side storylines are just straight up entertaining. Delivering a mold of a dude's cock to someone, the Minotaur was a lot of fun too, and of course who can forget, you killed his mater and fucked his pater. They're not all funny or super lighthearted, but man was it appreciated, just to make the whole experience a little more palatable. I'm not trying to say that Odyssey isn't a grind, because holy shit, yes it is. Easily one of the most grindy AAA games I've ever played. I guess I just didn't find it nearly as tedious as most others did though. Well, what about the combat? In here, it's a lot like Origins, but I honestly love what they added to it. There is, of course, a shield missing now, and that's sort of unfortunate, but also sort of not, because it wasn't used too much in Origins. Here, Odyssey instead has 8 total abilities you can use in combat, 4 for melee and 4 for ranged. This coming off the massive skill tree where you can equip both passive and active abilities like the ones previously stated. And even though some of these abilities are just flat out too strong, I thought they were a great addition to the combat, and to me it's just one more thing that you can personalize in this game. The game also features slightly more customization thanks to now being able to pick and choose pieces of armor rather than one whole outfit like in Origins. The system is a bit of a dick with how much it costs to upgrade your favorite gear, but you can always wear whatever piece you want and have it visually appear as another piece of gear you have owned, as well as gear you may have owned at one point and have now discarded. It's fair for the most part I'd say, but naturally you're going to be forced into a new set of digs that you don't like as much, solely because you can't afford to upgrade the other set that has the stats and effects you actually want. With that said though, I think that's it for my discussion on Odyssey. For me still, Odyssey is not an Assassin's Creed game. And on its own merits, for me at least, it's a rock solid open world experience that anyone who can take a slower game will enjoy. I know folks find the RPG elements weak as hell and the combat a worse version of The Witcher, and while I agree that they're certainly not class leading, they still did the job just fine, and kept me engaged and entertained. Simply setting the Assassin's Creed heritage aside may not do anything for you, or simply will not be something that you as a consumer feel like you should do. All I'm saying is that when I did, Odyssey really opened up to me and I began truly enjoying myself. But what does the future hold? Is Odyssey the end of the Assassin's Creed series? Will we ever see a return to the traditional style of Assassin's Creed games? Well, I'm not from the future, so I can't really say. Still though, I do have my guesses. My assumption is that with the recent announcement of Assassin's Creed Ragnarok, Assassin's Creed will be maintaining this vast open world RPG style, in terms of movement, combat, everything. For me, I don't necessarily mind that. Let's just hope that Ragnarok has a whole heaping spoonful of both assassinating and creeding, as the 3 most recent entries have been sorely lacking in at least one of the 2. Shortcomings aside though, the Assassin's Creed series can hold its hooded head high as one of the most consistently profound, interesting, beautiful, and just plain fun gaming experiences amongst a sea of lame yearly release game series. I have and will continue to love the Assassin's Creed series. However, if the series were to be cancelled tomorrow, I wouldn't be the least bit sad. We have had over 13 years of fantastic characters, amazing open worlds, memorable stories, and thought-provoking ideals brought to us via this incredible series. We may get inundated with events in the present, overwhelmed even, but the memories, ones of valor, tragedy, heartbreak, profundity, the good, the bad, the John even, those memories are forever weaved into the very core of our being. In truth, these stories, these characters, they live on through us alone, as we are the heralds of their memory. One day it may take an animus to do it, but whatever the future holds for the Assassin's Creed series, it's up to us to ensure that the stories told and the lessons learned withstand the test of time. Thank you for watching.